On a sweltering afternoon in June 2017, the United States Capitol, a symbol of democracy, debate, and legislative power, became the stage for an act of grassroots resistance that would reverberate far beyond its marble halls. The air inside Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's office was charged, not with political negotiation, but with the cries and chants of people who had come not as lobbyists or politicians, but as Americans fighting for their lives. Many were in wheelchairs. Some relied on ventilators or mobility aids. They were part of a coordinated demonstration led by ADAPT, a national disability rights group with a long history of direct action. Their message was urgent and clear: no cuts to Medicaid. They came to protest the Trump administration's proposed budget, which included deep and sweeping cuts to Medicaid funding, upwards of $800 billion over 10 years. For millions of Americans, Medicaid is not just a healthcare program. It is the backbone of survival, especially for people with disabilities, seniors, and low-income families. It funds not only doctor visits or prescriptions, but essential services like in-home care, personal assistance, and medical equipment. Services that allow people to live independently in their communities rather than be forced into nursing homes or institutions. The protesters were fully aware of what the proposed budget meant: the potential unraveling of the safety net that kept them out of hospitals, that allowed them to work, to go to school, to be active participants in society. They had tried writing letters. They had made phone calls. Now, they were putting their bodies on the line, literally lying on the floors of congressional offices, blocking hallways, chanting until their voices cracked. What happened next was both predictable and shocking. Capitol Police, citing safety and obstruction concerns, began arresting the protesters. But these weren't typical arrests. Officers lifted people out of their wheelchairs, some of whom screamed in fear or cried out in pain. They removed prosthetics, maneuvered around oxygen tanks, and dragged people out of hallways as news cameras rolled. In total, 43 people were arrested and charged with crowding, obstructing, or incommoding, a law often used against non-violent protest. The images and videos went viral within hours. Social media exploded with reactions: horror, anger, empathy. It wasn't just the brutality of the removals that shocked the public. It was the clarity of the protesters' message and the raw courage behind it. Here were people society often overlooks: those with significant disabilities, many requiring round-the-clock care, risking arrest, bodily harm, and public exposure to fight for a right most Americans take for granted: access to health care. Interviews conducted after the arrests underscored the stakes. One woman said, "If Medicaid is cut, I will have no choice but to go into an institution. I don't want to lose my freedom." Another man, speaking from his wheelchair, said, "They want to take away our care, our lives, our future." These were not political talking points. These were lived realities. For these Americans, Medicaid was not a handout. It was a social contract, a promise that their lives mattered. The proposed budget, according to many experts, would have fundamentally transformed Medicaid from an open-ended entitlement to a capped block grant system, giving states less money over time and more freedom to cut services. The Congressional Budget Office warned that millions would lose coverage. The Trump administration argued the changes were necessary to curb government spending and reduce dependency. Critics responded that what was being framed as reform was in reality a massive step backward, an abandonment of some of the nation's most vulnerable citizens. In the days following the protest, politicians like Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren condemned both the budget proposal and the treatment of the demonstrators. "What kind of country are we?" Sanders asked in a tweet, "when we arrest disabled people for protesting to keep their health care?" The public outcry may have played a role in the fate of the legislation. Just weeks later, the Senate's attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act, closely tied to the Medicaid cuts, failed dramatically, with Senator John McCain casting a pivotal no vote on the Senate floor. It was a moment of high drama in American politics, but beneath it was the persistent drumbeat of civic action. The Capitol protest was not an isolated event. It was part of a broader movement to defend healthcare access, one that united people across disability rights groups, health organizations, civil rights advocates, and ordinary citizens who had never protested before but recognized what was at stake. It reminded the country that healthcare is not just a policy debate, it's a question of values. Who do we include? Who do we care for? And who gets left behind when budgets are balanced on the backs of the vulnerable? The people arrested in the Capitol that day were not famous. They didn't have political action committees or major donors. What they had was their stories, their courage, and an unshakable belief that their lives were worth fighting for. Their act of resistance forced a national reckoning, one that still echoes in debates about healthcare today. The footage of that protest, of people in wheelchairs being handcuffed for demanding the right to live with dignity, remains one of the most powerful indictments of how policy can become profoundly personal. It also serves as a reminder: democracy is not just about voting or debating bills. Sometimes, it is about refusing to be silent in the face of injustice, even if it means being carried away. And so, as we reflect on that day and the lives it touched, we're left with a simple but powerful truth. When the people most affected by decisions are given a voice, they speak not only for themselves, but for the soul of the nation.